first thing that appeared on the screen. And I held up my phone and it snagged the QR code and, out zaps the properties from my phone into their pockets. And then 3 days later, a pair of camping tires arrived in the mail, which I didn't need at all. I treasure those things, actually. It's my first experience. But I stood up, I remember, from my computer at the time and did a little dance around the room. Because I knew I felt the future. I knew that something amazing was happening, that nobody was going to stop this. We've got a pure math-based protocol that lives on a distributed network and runs peer-to-peer. No government ultimately can control this anymore. They can control algebra. So it's a beautiful thing. It was magical, and you begin to understand, hey guys, there's a real chance for liberty in our time. It can actually happen. It can really happen. It's not easy. It's going to take a lot of creativity and some hard work, some moral courage also, but it can happen. What we have to do, I mean you and me, and the whole world of the division of labor globally, the market economy itself, we have to outsmart the state. And you know what? It's not that. So I have three wonderful gentlemen with me here today. We're going to talk about these sort of edgy, radical ideas. We call it economic secession. It's not the best term for it, because we're not talking about economic isolation. We're not talking about separation from the world of global economics. We're talking about actually integrating into the world economy through a kind of legal secession, actually, by working our way around the existing cruft. When I say the word cruft, do you know what I mean? The code geeks know the word cruft. Yeah, okay. Okay, so you know what cruft is, right? So here's what happens. You're writing a program, and you keep changing, and you keep changing it. You've got a problem, because the old code that's part of the software, it is no longer relevant to the operation of the software itself. It just is bogging things down. And the more cruft you have in a program, the more boggy it gets. And ultimately, your new code doesn't mix with the old code, and the whole thing completely falls apart. So you have to eliminate the cruft. Part of writing code is eliminating the cruft. The state never eliminates its cruft. We've got like 100 years of cruft in the world of the state. 100 years. And it's messing up everything. And nobody seems to know anything about it. What's interesting to me when I reflect on this reality? Most of the horrible things that exist in the system are not the responsibility of any living person. We're being ruled by a bunch of dead people, actually. We passed a bunch of crappy laws a long time ago, and nobody knows what to do about it. It's a terrible thing. And nobody's willing to take responsibility for it. The system keeps perpetuating itself. And nobody knows what to do. Well, this is something we can do about it. We can step outside the system. It's like in the latest Hunger Games film. Did you see it? Right? You remember the line, every system has a flaw? Right? We have to find it, exploit it, and only then will we find our freedom. I love that movie. When she shoots the arrow, it collapses down. That's why I imagine the stick, it's shattered. So today we have Tom Bell, who's something of a mentor of mine, actually. Professor Bell taught at Chapman University, and he's done so much scholarship on copyrights, high-tech internet law, consent theory, and so many aspects of IP. We've been sort of tracking each other for years. I think when I first introduced myself to him, it's very interesting. I met him for the first time today. You and I have been, more or less drinking from the same beer for years, right? Actually, I used a different metaphor this morning, but I want to use that for the program. Eli Dorado, am I saying that wrong? Yeah. Is a PhD student at George Mason University, a fellow at Mercatus Center. Mercatus has been doing some of the best work in cryptocurrency. They have a monograph out that I think is probably the clearest thing I've ever read. Did you ever read something you think, God, I wish I'd written this? I feel that way about a lot of Mercatus material, actually. And then finally, my old friend Chris Klein, who's an economist at George Mason University and a specialist in economic development. We're going to be talking about these subjects of startup cities. Each one of them is going to explain much better than I have a little bit about the subject, and we're going to go from there. So I think I'll just sit down. Yeah. And so I think, Tom, we'll start with you. And if you would address the subject of the short-term potential of startup cities and seasteading for economic succession and flourishing of liberty in our times. Go ahead.
Hey, Jeff. So, startup cities, has anybody heard about them? It's a development in Honduras and other places, hopefully. Wonderful, good. I think it's the best prospect for liberty in the real world that you'll see in your lifetimes. It's very exciting, I think, to all friends of liberty, especially young friends of liberty, because in part, not much has happened on the ground yet. It's mostly potential. So I'll tell you about it quickly. The startup cities that we see actually beginning in Honduras are the result of a program they launched, a legislative program, to take the idea of free trade zones an extra step, or we might say an extra leap. Some people call these leap zones for legal, economic, administrative, and political zones. And the idea is, you like free trade? Yeah, we like free trade. But it's not enough. It's not enough simply to say, we're going to have light taxes in this area. That doesn't get you all the freedom you need for human flourishing. Instead, you need to have some liberty to choose better laws. And so in Honduras, they've created, under their Z statute, Z-E-D-E, you might want to look that up, a program which they've only just started implementing to have something like a Hong Kong in Central America. That's their goal. They want to bring prosperity to their people, and peace and freedom, and they look at Hong Kong and what happened there, and they want to implement it. And I could say a lot more. I won't have time here to say much. My friend Mark Lutter has set up a gathering after this. He's back there holding up his hand, and he told me where it's, and I've forgotten now, Mark. Yell out to them. Where are we going to meet? All right. Renwick at 1:30. Thank you. So if you want to come here more. So right now, I'll just say a couple more sentences and hand it over to my colleagues. Basically, in Honduras, they have a program they've just launched to create what you might call quasi-sovereign territories that will have their own legal systems, which will be, I dare say, much more free than any we currently see in the world. I think Friends of Liberty are going to be very excited when we unveil the legal regime they plan there. I've been active in that. I've been helping them plan that out. So I think you're going to get some good news. I can't tell you all of it now, but take heart, my friends. Good things are on the way.
You may anticipate some question, actually, that's going to be asked about this whole panel. The first thing that people think when they hear somebody like this is, oh, the government will never allow this. It's going to stop. Once freedom starts to break out, somebody's going to crush it. How do you respond to that?
Well, the Z program in Honduras is offered by the government. It's their idea. As I said, it's by the Honduran people, for the Hondurans, it's under Honduran control. It's what they want. Now, it's true they might renege. I will say, despite their many virtues, the Honduran politicians have not achieved stability in their governance. So you can't always be sure things will be working the same way in a few years in Honduras. But the statute is written, and you can bet any memorandum of understanding that are entered into will have protections against change. No guarantees, Jeff, never guarantees, but I think it's the best bet we have going now.
You know, I detect in so much of this discussion a sense of paradigm shift taking place all around the world. You know, it's almost like we've lived through a century of Leviathan control, the attempt to use the state to manage society, to manage economic life, and that fails in so many respects, not just here, but all over the world. Do you see that paradigm, what you're talking about, as part of this paradigm shift?
I do. It's very, very exciting. I think I've been talking about Honduras because that's where they're ahead of everybody else. The company that I'm consulting with, we've talked with other countries, and as soon as this breaks out, and it's a success, and I think it will be, other countries are going to follow. They will. And I'm so interested in this because, I love and fear my country. And I want to bring this home. You probably won't end up moving in Honduras, or mine. I think some of you will. Mark is moving there. He's moving there. And some of you will too, I bet. I hope you will, and you flourish. And I might not do that. I want to bring this reform home. When we can get it succeeding in Honduras and some other countries at the Startup Cities Institute, my friend Mark is over there. He might want to raise his hand. He works over there. They're in Guatemala. They're trying to get this going in other places in the world. We have more startup cities. We have one succeeding, many succeeding in Honduras, others in other countries. We're going to bring that home here. That's the goal. You could have Detroit in the next startup city. It's 5 years, maybe less, and we'll bring it home for you.
Thank you so much. Eli, would you want to address the subject of cryptocurrency and the short-term prospects? Maybe give a little bit of an introduction. I find that the subject is interesting. Like, some people understand it really well. Other people, it's a little intimidating. So maybe you can just kind of talk about, give a short tutorial.
Sure. So I want to start by disagreeing with Tom, because I think that cryptocurrency is the best prospect for liberty. So the core innovation of Bitcoin and of cryptocurrencies in general is the ability to transfer value electronically without the need for a third party to authorize the transaction. So if you think about when I send a digital file, I send you a Word file via email, I send it to you, but I still have it. So there's no guarantee if I'm just transferring a money file that I can transfer it to you and you can be certain that I won't still spend it, right? So it solves the double spending problem, as it's called. So that's the real, the core intellectual foundation behind it.
And yes, much more to say, but just so that we're clear on this point, the money becomes real private property.
Yes, that's right. So it's digital, but it can be transferred. The ownership of it can be transferred.
And two people can't own the same.
Well, very advanced uses of the protocol, they can do something like that. Actually, it's really interesting. We'll talk about it later.
Okay.
But this ability to make a transfer without the need for a third-party authorizer is really important, because the way that governments regulate so much of our activity is by going after the third parties, right? So one example that I like to give is the example of WikiLeaks. So in late 2010, WikiLeaks leaked State Department cables, and a lot of patriotic, liberty-loving Americans wanted to give them money to support WikiLeaks, and which was totally legal to do. WikiLeaks is a totally legit nonprofit based out of the UK. And they went to the website and they tried to do it, and it turned out it wasn't possible, because someone in the U.S. government, some congressmen, they made phone calls. And they called up Visa, PayPal, MasterCard, and just by making 3 phone calls, applying a little pressure, all of a sudden WikiLeaks was cut off from being able to receive funds. And so today some of that's been restored, and they've won some lawsuits and they've gotten their ability to receive payments. But actually the majority of their donations now come through cryptocurrency. So cryptocurrency is censorship resistant money. So you can spend it without the state. They might still be able to figure out who you are. It's not totally anonymous. They might be able to punish you after the fact, but you can make the transfer. And that raises the cost of enforcement of a lot of laws, and we all know from basic economics, when you raise the price of something, there's less of it. So hopefully we can have the government doing a lot less enforcement of these laws.
So often people raise objections to cryptocurrency to me. Like, for example, you pointed out it's not entirely anonymous, right? There is certain traceability, the public ledger is there forever. But doesn't it frustrate you that people come up with these various objections to cryptocurrency, and in your mind you're thinking, okay, that may be a slight limitation, that's a slight risk, but how does that compare to the dollar, right? I mean, that's the relevant comparison, right? Not some perfect ideal world, but the existing reality.
Absolutely right. So if you think about credit card transactions, right? Every credit card transaction that you make is known by your credit card company. They know exactly where you made the transaction, what time you made it, what the amount was, what the merchant was, sometimes what the item was. You have no financial privacy when it comes to
You cough up the whole of your identity just to make a stupid purchase.
Exactly. Credit card companies can predict all kinds of things about you. They can predict if you're pregnant.
Sometimes just want to, do you own Bitcoin?
Yeah.
And so you use it?
Yeah.
Okay. What did it do for you, like, as a theoretician, as a thinker, as an intellectual, to sort of mix your labor with something like cryptocurrency? Did it enlighten you as to what money could be? Had you known this or understood this before?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, just as an economist, it totally raised the bar on my understanding of quantitative economics. So many interesting issues that come up. And then just thinking about what more money can be, besides just what we've taken it for granted.
ways in which the market is teaching us, rather than the intellectuals sort of bringing to bear their own understanding. It's like you have to always be humble and look outside the window, see how we can inform our theory in light of the existing prevailing practice.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
I mean, Satoshi Nakamoto never went to the Senate Banking Committee to get approval for his currency, right?
No,
Bernanke never was consulted, was he? Bernanke was never consulted about Bitcoin.
He was never consulted, although I will say that I briefed the Fed this week.
Did you? How did it go?
It went very well. They were very interested in asking me questions. So.
Are they intimidated?
I don't think so. I think we're presenting a friendly face, which I think is the thing to do. So everybody be cool. The last thing I want is to read a news report. Students for Liberty member is arrested for selling weapons-grade uranium on the internet via Bitcoin. So please don't do that. Let's be friendly for a while.
Okay, so much more on that. But before we continue to dive into this next point, Chris, talk to us about what cryptocurrencies could mean for the developing world.
Sure. Well, let me start by saying both Tom and you are wrong. The greatest prospect for liberty is startup cities with cryptocurrency. The interesting thing, I think, from an economist perspective is this issue of economic development and governance. And Bitcoin and startup cities, they're very important, but let's not lose focus of what they are. They are forms of private governance. And in order to understand why this is important, think about what economic development entails. And economic development, well-being, entails social cooperation. It entails people cooperating with each other under the division of labor. And as we increase the extent of the market, we get more stuff that we like. Not just material items, but also non-material items, leisure time with our families and friends. We're able to develop ourselves as individuals. So liberty is important in itself, I'm not denying that, but it's also important because it generates a lot of good things that we all value as well and improves our quality of life. Here's the thing. There is a state-centric view of development. And what I mean by that is most people, not just economists, but people in general, think there needs to be someone in charge and there needs to be someone planning development. That entails both the institutional structure, things like money, things like urban planning, but also in terms of governing or maintaining the economy so it's not anarchy, right? That's kind of the man in charge myth that most people hold on to. But here's the empirical reality. When we look out the window, we look out at the world, what do we see? Well, we see governments. Many of them are terrible. Some are better than others. But we also see lots of people cooperating with each other and not relying on government. Even in the most developed countries, people rely on norms. They rely on dispersed networks of trust and cooperation to get along and to get things done. So really, what I want to suggest to you is this idea of governance is not radical or fringe at all. It's actually what makes the world go round, and it's been going on for centuries and centuries. In fact, as long as people have populated this earth, governance has been entailed in cooperating and facilitating gains in exchange and gains in wealth. And so Bitcoin, startup cities, they sound radical to people, but part of putting on this friendly face, I think, or just communicating the importance of these things to people, is to point out that, look, in some sense, it's not radical at all. We can think of tons of different cases of private governance and the benefits that they generate. And these are just two of the current manifestations of that. In terms of short-term potential, it's huge in terms of Bitcoin. Most financial transactions already have some virtual aspect to them. This is just the latest innovation in it. And as Eli pointed out, the power is that you can avoid a lot of the grabbing hand of the state, regulations, taxes, confiscation, and so on. This has dramatic implications both within developed countries for people and groups of people that might be excluded from the formal system, but especially for the poorest people in the world. Think about this. For 2013, the World Bank estimates that remittances, so money sent from a foreign worker back to their home country, were $400 billion. That's enormous. This is one of the most important ways of helping the poorest people in the world. People going to a different country, working, and then sending money back home. The way this happens right now is you have to go through a series of intermediaries, and it costs anywhere from 10 to 20%. In other words, once you pay the fee at each step, about 10 to 20% of the money you send back home is gone in those fees. It's not necessarily bad. That's the cost you have to pay to get from point A to point B. Bitcoin gets those costs down to 1% or less. So it's an amazing opportunity for individuals to help other people in other countries and to ensure that they have resources to improve their well-being. In terms of startup cities, I think the short-term potential is much less. Not because I think startup cities are bad by any means or can't generate significant benefits, but as Tom pointed out, there's significant upfront costs. There's fixed costs to setting it up. And while I think there's tons of long-term potential in the next year or two, that's going to be limited by definition, just because it's going to take a while to set up, to take hold, and to see what those results are.
Now, there is a lot of concern about the problem of economically excluded. People who don't have access to banks, right? People who don't have access to credit cards. I mean, what percentage of the world's population are we talking about? People live in the wrong IP addresses, for example. They just can't, they don't have access to the digital age.
Sure. I don't know an exact percentage, and I don't want to misspeak, but it's a significant number of people. Even within developed countries, there are people that are excluded from the financial system and from the credit system. But of course, this problem is magnified, especially in developing and in poor countries, in countries that you might think of what are typically called weak or failed states, which means the states are terrible. There's no functioning banking system. We talk about kind of third-party monitoring here with information confiscation. Those are important issues. But think about in other countries that there's no infrastructure like that whatsoever. In some sense, cryptocurrency is a extremely powerful tool precisely because you don't need that infrastructure anymore. We actually don't need the state whatsoever. It is irrelevant. And so forget about this idea of fixing weak and failed states. Forget it completely. Let them collapse. And then you can have these private forms of governance emerge that can fill the gap where government is lacking.
Let's say it's 10%, 20%, 30%, whatever it is. The potential is extraordinary, right?
Yes.
I mean, if you integrate these people into the global system of division of labor and production, it can be explosive for world prosperity.
Exactly. Here's one estimate that we can kind of think through. It is estimated that the informal economy, and this is things that exclude things like murder, hitmen, sale of people, so it's not like it's kind of things that we would find in public. Informal activity outside the state, it's estimated that globally it's $10 trillion a year. If that is true, that means that the informal economy is the second largest economy in the world behind the United States and ahead of China. So imagine then if what you can do in terms of bringing those people and integrating them into the global economy and think about the opportunities, it's truly amazing.
There are many places in the world that even if you do have a bank, you do have a credit card, you still can't buy stuff online because of the anti-fraud problem, because of the fraud problem, right? It's just gigantic. Credit card companies spend billions, right, or trying to prevent it. So to get rid of this, is this a major reason for the transactions, high transactions costs of conventional monetary institutions and banking? Just the anti-fraud measure?
Fraud's part of it. Part of it is just the number of intermediaries you have to go to to get from point A to point B. And then each of them incur costs as well. And here's the thing, you got to point out when you raise the price to less than, one of the most devastating things to business is regulations. These poor countries are poor because they have terrible regulations or governments that threaten to predate their citizens. That raises the cost of doing business, which means you have to be willing to pay more to move resources around. You lower the cost of doing that, you get more resource flows, you get more interactions, and a greater division of labor.
What are the prospects of controlling the cryptocurrencies from the top? I noticed like Russia, I think, a couple of weeks ago, I think Putin said, well, look, Bitcoin is officially banned in Russia. I mean, this sounds laughable in many ways, but what do you think the prospects are?
Sure. So the thing about money is that it relies a lot on network effects. So if a lot of people use money, it's going to be, if a lot of people use cryptocurrency, it's going to be really hard to regulate. But what the government can do is at this early stage, it can probably push it into the shadows and make not a lot of people use it. And then it's still, could be useful within a small community, perhaps. People could still use it to transfer, value, but just the volume wouldn't be as high. So I think that there is a danger that governments could push it into the shadows, which is why we're trying to carve out some space for it.
Yeah, and this is what they're trying to do with file sharing too, right? I mean, there's an attempt you know, I remember when the napkin was taken down and all these regulators were celebrating the end of file sharing, but it's gone. Never to return.
So this is an area where yes, we've managed to keep some space for liberty. It still relies a little bit on political persuasion because in the U.S. we have freedom of speech and we don't censor internet transactions. If the government really wanted to go after ISPs and shut down other forms of file sharing, they could probably do a better job. They've just decided it's not working.
There's also a real issue of regulatory uncertainty. I mean, banks these days are really risk averse. Even if you're not doing something that's obviously illegal, there's a real sense of suspicion, you know, on the part of banks towards anybody who's doing cryptocurrency, like even now. Right?
Yes, that's right. So hopefully we're starting to see more and more regulatory guidance that says banks can be banking Bitcoin businesses.
You know, a funny thing happened to me the other day. I was trying to open up a new account at the bank, and I began to kind of actually ask the employees at the bank, what's your view about Bitcoin? And one place they were like, ouch, maybe we should find another bank. But I went to a different one, and the guy said, oh, wow, we all love Bitcoin. We trade it all the time. And everybody in this office does. You know, yeah, so they're all about it. So it all depends, right? It depends on where you go.
It depends, and internationally too, there's going to be competition on this. So I think the biggest bank in Africa now is piloting a program whereby you can just integrate Bitcoin with your bank account, so you can hold balances
The
in
development's been so
Bitcoin and
so
other
extraordinary.
things. Yeah,
In 12 months. You know, here's something else that occurred to me. What happens if states punish the coming and going from national monies into Bitcoin so severely, or cryptocurrency so severely, that they actually incentivize people to move into cryptocurrency and live there and stay within that ecosystem? Could that actually happen?
It could. I think it would take. So I think the price of Bitcoin is still really volatile, so we need Bitcoin derivatives so that people can arbitrage and keep the price sort of stable. But yeah, I think that if there's a disincentive to ever coming back into the dollar economy, why not just hang out there?
Unintended consequences,
Yeah.
right? Can I ask you something about startup cities? It's also a similar concern, right? It's the coming and going. Once you're there, you're safe. Everything's fine. But, I mean, the U.S. doesn't actually like its citizens to go very far from this reach, right? I mean, isn't there certain punitive measures being used even now to prevent people from taking these kinds of steps you're talking about?
Well, certainly they've made it more difficult, and the United States is almost unique in this regard, for U.S. citizens to disavow their citizenship. It's a very frightening prospect that we wear these shackles which we can't shake off, reminiscent of Eastern Europe under the Soviets. But I don't think that's really a problem for the startup cities that are planned right now. It's a little early to say. As Chris noted, there's startup costs, which we are still spending to get things up and running. But as you can imagine, it's not going to be but the bravest, the boldest, and probably the youngest of the Americans who take the dive, like Mark Lutter, to move to these startup cities, really, at least in Honduras. To judge from that example, which is ahead of every other country, it's really for the Hondurans. There will be a few expatriates there, but that's really not the foremost of my concerns. And that said, too, would you go to a place unless they could give you guarantees that you'll be able to live there and rally prosperity and not have foreign goons come drag you home?
Right.
I think we can fix that problem.
You know, it's interesting to imagine this combination of startup cities and Bitcoin. I have to say, one of the projects I've been working on over the last 6 months is basically a startup city in the cloud. I mean, I've bought a piece of real estate, Lizzie got me, and I'm creating the infrastructure of a communications network in the city. And my crowdfunding campaign was at least 1/3 funded through cryptocurrency. Yeah, and it made it wonderful. I mean, many people who otherwise would not have given and contributed, with it.
You need a legal system to speak of it.
We'll see. We'll see what happens. Okay, so I think we should open up for questions. Is it okay? Do we need to go to the microphones? Is that what we do? Okay, so if you want to line up.
Thank you very much. Two quick questions. What is vouchering? And then also with the free state movement in Honduras, what is the exact carrots that you're offering the Honduran government as far as taxes? What are the, what is Valtrain? First question. And then with the Free State movement, then what are the carrots that you're offering the Honduran government as far as taxes that you're going to agree to pay for the zone, et cetera, like that? And then what is the stick or the poison pill that they're trying to put into the legislation, or the hurdles that they're going to have to jump, that they can't then go ahead and reclaim the Free State zone? So are you putting it in at the constitutional level? So that, you know, what are the hurdles that you're putting in place to make it difficult for them to reclaim?
I didn't catch the first thing you're asking me about. Is what is it?
Valtrain, you all talked about Valtrain as far as with Napster. I never heard that expression before.
Is that
Valtrain?
Well, let me tell you the second question.
File share, yeah. File share, I think is what you mean.
Yes.
File
Yeah,
share.
file share.
Oh, file share. Oh, I didn't understand the
Yeah,
pronunciation.
I thought it was just some new high-level technical term, right?
Yes.
I got nothing to say about file sharing. With regard to the second bit, it's not me. I heard you say me. This is a Honduran project. I'm from the outside, looking in and helping the private company that wants to get involved. But as far as what the Hondurans have done to prevent, basically to reassure the world that they won't renege, well, there's a number of mechanisms. Anybody who works in international trade can tell you about a lot of these. Choice of law, choice of foreign provisions and contracts. Basically, there are international treaties such that if a government reneges on its agreements with private parties, those private parties can hail the foreign government. This recently happened in Argentina with regard to some of its bonds on which it defaulted. The private party can go to, say, a court here in D.C. and say, Argentina defaulted on its bond, violating our agreement. I'm suing the government of Argentina here in U.S. courts, and because they're a signatory of the New York Convention, just as you are in the United States, I can get a judgment against Argentina, and I can seize their assets. And basically, the Hondurans, Honduras is also a signatory of the New York Convention. It's just an example. It shouldn't surprise you, because why? Because governments want money. They don't have enough money. And to get money, they have to convince the private sector that they're going to be nice, that you can trust governments, that they won't renege. And so governments they're actually willing to shackle themselves so they can make credible commitments. And we intend to work that to the point.
Success of cryptocurrency versus the abolition of the Fed and the return to the gold standard. Which one is the most likely?
Well, the question is, what is most likely? Success of cryptocurrency, or that we'll get an enlightened group of statesmen who will give us a glorious monetary system because it's in our interest to What do you think the prospects of return to the gold standard are?
Success of cryptocurrencies is like 1 million times or more likely.
Okay.
So, yeah.
No, this is an important question because, if you haven't read Hayek's Denationalization of Money, monograph that came out in like 1974, he spent a lifetime struggling to persuade governments to fix the money problem, right? And as somebody realized, nobody's listening to me anymore. Nobody even cares. These jerks are never going to do the right thing. We have to completely separate money from this.
Yeah, and maybe another thing to think about is that Bitcoin is not the only cryptocurrency. So you could have actually competition among a whole lot of cryptocurrencies for what's the best way to change the value of the unit of cash.
Let's hear it for Dogecoin.
So we're going to see just, I think, a proliferation of different experiments in cryptocurrency and essentially in monetary policy.
It's amazing to imagine that we were subjected to currency itself to market forces. Yes, sure. Go ahead.
Sam, you guys are talking about cryptocurrencies, which is awesome, but isn't it the case that a distributed asset ledger has more power than just for currency itself? And as a follow-up, what are some other technological
Yes, let's talk about theory.
power of the state?
Right. Go ahead.
Okay, sure. So in the long run, I think it gets a lot more exciting than just money. So I think that cryptocurrency could do for finance what the internet did for communications. So if you think about communications 20, 30 years ago, there was still an intermediary, the phone company, and you could only use the communications application that they offered, right, which is like calling. right? So that's all you can do. Right now, with the internet, what we have is a transport layer. TCP is like just a dumb way of transferring packets around the internet, moving packets around the internet. And the application layer of the internet is completely decentralized. People can just on both ends of the connection, they can agree on what they want to use, and then they can do all kinds of things. You can do email, you can do social networking, you can play video games, you can do video calling, right? That's all stuff that the phone company could have offered, but it was just, they didn't do it. So, so I think that that's really where the excitement is, and it turns out Bitcoin is programmable money. So Bitcoin transactions have if-then statements. They have lots of logic in there that you can use, and that can be used to make a lot of exciting things. So you can do something like crowdfunding on a completely decentralized basis, self-enforcing, the network enforcement. So you don't need, if you want to have a 3D printed gun, you don't have to worry about your crowdfunding platform censoring it. You can do multi-party transactions. So if I want to buy a bid from Chris online and I don't know him, I don't want to just send him a lot of money and have him ship stuff to me. What I can do is I can use Tom as an arbitrator and say, well, 2 of the 3 of us have to sign the transaction before it goes through. So I can send the money to Chris, he sends me the good, if it's okay, checks out, we sign it, if not, we appeal to Tom. And so this enables a completely decentralized market in arbitration services, right? So you're starting to have the basis of a legal system for the internet there. You can use it to make decentralized prediction markets. So instead of the arbitrator being Tom, we can make the arbitrator the Google News feed. And so we can bet on who's going to win the next election, hedge against the worst candidate winning, perhaps. So there's just all kinds of possibilities: micropayments, notary service, identity management, smart property, something people are talking about. So it's really, I think, beyond the next 5 years is really where the potential lies.
Do you have any comments on that?
I agree. I have to Eli, that it's very exciting what you can do with Bitcoin in terms of decentralizing legal services, and I've been looking at that and I'm really excited about it.
Just linking this up with the previous question about the gold standard versus Bitcoin. That a general issue with government is when you create anything. I mean, think about what's going on right now with using your cell phone on an airplane. That regulation was passed back in like 95 or something. Everyone knew it was fake, but they still, that didn't mean by it had no effect. But it took how many years to get rid of, and we're not even rid of it, to start to get rid of that. The minute government passes anything or gets involved in anything, it's very, very difficult to get rid of it because of vested interests and just inertia of bureaucracy. One way around that is not to, there's 2 ways. One is to kind of fight to chip away at government. That's the Hayek I've spent my life and no one's listening to me. An alternative is to innovate around it. In other words, you make government irrelevant. What Eli's talking about, what Tom's talking about, really what there are is examples of making government irrelevant. So we say, look, we're not going to fight government, we're going to do an end around, and then it becomes completely irrelevant. And that's the power of these forms of government.
So my question is with regards to startup cities. It's pretty obvious that there are very favorable types of businesses in the initial type of startup city that you're envisioning. Software, for instance, can be very decentralized and you can very easily be located. But as a scientist and engineer, one of the things that I'm very interested in is the future of manufacturing. And there is a real problem, it seems to me, with the way that we're able to move capital equipment around in order to establish new types of manufacturing lines. What I'm curious to hear from your perspective is, do you see, at least, is this something that Honduras is interested in? Are they trying to attract manufacturing? If so, how? And then in the future, how might you see this becoming relevant to people trying to make startup cities?
Great question. To speak to it really quickly, I can tell you, first, really, what we expect to see in Honduras is existing maquiladoras, which are already under a certain kind of free trade regime. We're going to convert over to the ZEDES, the startup city regime they're implementing in Honduras, because it offers them even greater benefits. And we've been talking with those companies about how to make that transition and what to get out of it. And they're excited, and that's good. But those are people who are stitching together clothing, and you're interested in high-tech stuff, as am I. Well, I can tell you, I'll just give you an anecdote. I was talking with somebody in Orange County. I'm from Orange County, and And this guy runs a high-tech medical company, and he told me this really a horror story about how the FDA got involved with some stuff they had shipped from China because it was improperly labeled, and it tied up their whole R&D program for 6 weeks. And I said to this guy, would you like a better, more friendly package for a system? And of course, the answer is yes. So Hondurans are interested in that. Everyone in the world wants big money and high-tech in their jurisdictions, and that's one of the things that makes me excited about this. Is once it gets going to Honduras, and people, in Central America and elsewhere, governments there say, we want some of that money, then they're going to have a huge incentive to implement similar programs.
So I'll just chip in also and say 3D printing is a way to manufacture things in a much smaller package, much more mobile package, and it's harder to regulate.
There's a lot to be said about 3D printing, right? What happens to
It could have been
regulatory state to patents to everything, right? And it's all shredded.
Yeah, and chemical printers is next.
Norway migrates to the digital world. Here we are. Okay, go ahead.
This question is mostly for Tom. In these startup cities, what mechanisms or checks and balances would exist to prevent them from going the way of most other states in terms of eroding human liberties?
Well, I would borrow from engineering and say you want redundant protections. People, ask me, Bill of Rights? Sure. You don't stop there. It's like when you build a bridge, you want to have one pillar fall and have that puppy still standing. It's the same thing here. It's institutional design, and there's lots of ways to do that. We already talked about some here. Building into your agreements the right to sue the sovereign in an independent forum and get remedies enforceable abroad. And then also bills of rights and freedom of exit, so that when you hack people off, saying, oh, new regulatory program, guys, yes, we're going. And you don't even need to invoke that. You just need to have the government understand. And that's what these people, they're going to move out just as quickly as they moved in. That's your real security, or part of a package of basically ways of security.
Hi, I just wanted to ask a couple of questions. One was, what's your opinion of the Ethereum, the scripting language that's going to kind of have the potential of JavaScript compared to static web pages? And what are your opinions on the kind of cryptographic IPOs for companies where you can essentially exchange stock anywhere in the world, or maybe cryptographic IPO for a startup city?
So this is just an elaboration on the earlier question, right? Have you looked at Ethereum?
So I've looked at it a little bit. And so what Ethereum does is it takes the scripting language of Bitcoin and just adds a whole lot more capabilities. So one of the things that they add is it's actually a Turing-complete language.
Right.
So it means it can do anything a computer, in theory, can do. I think that the problem that Ethereum is going to run into is that they're just way too ambitious in a way. And so there's actually governance that goes on within the development of these currencies, right? It's an open source project, there's project leaders, and you kind of want leadership that is, in a way, very conservative and cautious, and because you're dealing with money, you don't want crazy people, oh, we can do everything day one. So I think Ethereum, it could be great, but it's going to suffer from just maybe a little bit of over-ambition.
If you don't understand what Ethereum is, I think there's a URL. Is it ethereum.com or .org?
I think it's .org.
.org. Go to that site, have a look at it, and it's absolutely mind-blowing.
Yeah.
The kinds of things that they're talking about now make Bitcoin look old-fashioned.
Yeah.
The main Ethereum developer, the main poster behind this infrastructure, is 19 years old. Amazing.
Yeah.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
No. Things are smart. Go ahead. Oh, yeah. Wait, you had another question?
I was talking about the cryptographic IPOs and
Yeah.
even cryptographic IPO for a startup city, in that you kind of have to own a share of the city to live there, type of thing.
Well, all this stuff is wildly speculative, and so much is going to be subject to market tests.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Go ahead.
You discussed earlier about how cryptocurrencies could help developing countries, particularly you mentioned that making remittances much more efficient. How will lack of access to internet in those countries apply to those sorts of benefits?
Well, of course, the access to internet's one thing, but cellular phones are the solution, in my view. In other words, internet's one way to access it, but cell phones now are more available than ever in Africa. Mainly, again, because, as I mentioned earlier, the providers circumvented the state in order to set it up, so it was lower cost to set it up. And yeah, look, you need technology to do it, so of course, to the extent that's limited, there's constraints on the market. But look, I would say this. One of the things that will happen is more complementary goods will also develop. In other words, think of Bitcoin or cryptocurrency as kind of, since that's what we're discussing, a primary good. As that becomes more widespread, these network effects that I was talking about, entrepreneurs will have an incentive to figure out new ways for more and more people to use them. One of those will be electronic devices that will grant more and more people access. So I would expect that to expand over time as well.
So I think another technology that can really help build out internet access in the developing world is drones. So Google has this Project Loon that you may have heard about that basically creates a stratospheric mesh network, and it is able to provide internet access to a wide area without the state coming in and regulating. Because if you're building broadband, terrestrial broadband, you're having to lay cables and stuff, you have to pay bribes and so on. And that's really what is holding back internet access in the developing world.
We have one more question. Go ahead.
So as the last question, it's maybe, there's been a debate among some economists over whether Bitcoin satisfies the regression theorem, which says that it traces value back to uses of non-monetary good. Can we say that Bitcoin satisfies this by being a tool for subverting the state?
One thing that's interesting, that's fascinating. That's an interesting answer. The funny thing about Bitcoin is that Bitcoin doesn't really care about the regression theorem, actually. It's fascinating. It seems to be the answer is just that the value of Bitcoin is in its payment network. Am I right about that? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think you make a really good point. I think it's both. So this is something I wrote about 2 or 3 years ago about the war on drugs is helping Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
We're using the coercion of the state to push people into a new kind of money. So we're using the coercion of the state, making some kinds of payments illegal with dollars, that is giving people no choice but to use Bitcoin. And that's helping bootstrap the network effects.
We should also say something on behalf of it. There are many people who are being victimized right now by governments. My friend Charlie Trim got hit pretty hard the other day. My old friend Ross Ulbricht actually is suffering in solitary confinement right now. We should think about these people. We need to see these people from jail for repression. So there was a massive case in Florida the other day. Somebody was arrested just for a local Bitcoin transaction. This is silly stuff, right? Well, listen, I would like to thank all of our panelists today, and also say, we're talking about another way to go about liberty. This is not just political action. This is not just having ever more seminars. We're talking about real implementation of liberty in our time. So I thank you for being here. Especially like to thank Chris and